Friends, family, welcome back to Challenging Faith. This is basically an impromptu part two of the conversation we were having about Israel, Palestine, the situation in Gaza right now. For those of us who have a desire to see justice toward those who are oppressed, for those of us that want to be part of the conversation, even though we can truthfully say that we're not experts, that we don't have all the data, that we're still learning, still reading, still listening. And I think that's the key takeaway from any kind of conversation about things that are beyond us. And we can say that this is beyond us, even though as human beings, we can connect. In the basic human level, we can connect to the desire to be safe, for the desire to not have conflict around us. We can also connect to, unfortunately, the negative inclinations, right? The negative inclinations to have to choose one side over the other. And so I said last time, and I'll repeat myself because it's extremely important to take a moment and pause, and above everything else, check in here. Where are the spaces where my privilege, where my theology, where my politics are being used for the oppression or the marginalization of other people? And to have the honest introspection with yourself, with myself, it's ridiculously important. And yet at the same time, in the process of having that introspection, in the process of gathering data, also being clear about we need to stop this genocide. What the state of Israel is doing in Gaza is unsustainable, it's unimaginable, it's barbaric, it's horrific. Just like when it happened on October 7th, we can truthfully, without any hesitation, say what Hamas did on October 7th, that's not the way to go. We don't believe in violence. We want peace. We want peace between nations. We want peace between different religions. And sometimes we can have these conversations and it sounds so both ridiculous and unattainable. Why it's ridiculous? Because it feels like so unattainable. But I have Muslim friends, I have Jewish friends, I have friends from Palestine, I have friends in Israel, I have friends here in this community, right here at the Happy Givers, that have different opinions, different thoughts about how things should be solved. But most of us can agree that we need justice, especially when you're talking about women and children that are in the crossfires of something they didn't ask for, in a situation that they didn't initiate, and they seem to be the first victims. And that's the problem with war, with conflict, with these horrific politics and dangerous politicians that use this language of these animals or these Arabs or these Jews, and we begin to use that language that dehumanizes the person. And so when I was in Israel, Palestine, I'll continue a little bit from our first conversation. I mentioned that I went to the wall that divides unjustly the West Bank and Israel, the state of Israel. And I was looking for that quote because one of our quotes was, there was an artwork of it on the wall. And the quote goes like, "If you're not hungry for justice, it's usually because you're too full with privilege." Anyways, I didn't find the quote. I didn't find the quote because there was other new artwork. In the space where it used to be, there was other artwork that was put on top. So I have one photo. I actually have two photos. One that's kind of like a big generic one, and one that's like looking at the quote. And I'll tell you what, even when I went and I'm walking around the wall, I was faced with the realization that I was there on this epic, important, necessary, painful trip, right? For the group, the Telos group that went. And here I am thinking about my stupid quote painted on the wall so that I can capture it and share it with everybody. Even in that context of pain and turmoil, of violence and death, even in that context of justice and injustice, I'm just walking around for a long time, just looking for something that would make me feel better about myself. And so it's necessary to walk a journey of humility, of self-awareness, of introspection, and asking those extremely, extremely hard questions about why am I actually involved? Why am I posting this? Why am I sharing about this? Why am I commenting? Can we at least be honest with ourselves? Do we actually care? Or do we care about how we look when we seem like we care? And I have to ask myself those questions as an organization, as we share different topics, different statements, different desires that we have as a nonprofit organization that's doing work here in Puerto Rico. And you're all more than welcome to come and see us here in Vega Baja. And yet at the same time, trying to be part of this global conversation, because we don't want to be silent when we're meant to be saying something. And I get the temptation of not talking because of the lack of expertise, but we don't have to be experts to know that if more than 15,000 children have been bombed to death, we should say stop. We should say enough. And then we can get into all the politics. We need to, because there's no solution without the difficult, tedious, arduous demand of coming together. And I suggest, this is my suggestion, because I think it's probably the most influential book I've ever read in my life. It's called The Long Walk to Freedom, and it's a 700, maybe 800 page long autobiography written by Nelson Mandela. And why I find it so refreshing going back to it, why it was so transformative to me the first time I read it, is because here's a man that we all know, and there's these beautiful quotes that he has about battling racism and, the destruction of apartheid, right? And there's still some elements that are manifested all over Africa. But, the crumbling of this political system, apartheid in South Africa, and his journey from living it, experiencing, fighting against it, the different ways that he fought against it, the price that he had to pay 20 plus years in Robben Island, the prison, coming out of Robben Island, the willingness to walk forgiveness, to choose peace over war, to then become the president of this nation, the first black man president of the nation of South Africa. A wonderful book that I highly recommend you read, because it allows us to see the journey through the eyes of somebody who was involved in all sorts of aspects of the liberation of the people of South Africa, and yet the internal struggles, the internal invitation, and all the things he walked through. But as I was there, like I said, walking by the wall, looking for my quote to feel good about myself, I had to challenge again the inclinations for the worship of the me, myself, and I. The worship for how this affects me, how me talking about this helps me, and how about we listen? How about we make a choice to engage others that think differently to us? And it doesn't mean that just because we're engaging with them when they think differently to us, we're not going to challenge the things they're saying or challenge the rhetoric that's destructive or abusive or toxic. And yet at the same time, if we lose sight of each other's humanity, then you know what the problem is? 3 generations down the line, they're still going to be making podcasts about the conflict in Israel-Palestine, as opposed to imagining a world where there's actually civil rights, where there's actually full rights, where there's actually full humanity from all camps, from all directions, from all spaces. Is it too idealistic? I prefer to be too idealistic. I prefer to hope and to imagine a world where there are solutions, where there is no war, because if we started them, we could end them. And so that's my hope. That's my dream. I might not have all the right words to verbalize it or even to inspire you to get involved. But when I was in Israel, Palestine, I met 2 gentlemen, an Israeli father and a Palestinian father. And I've shared some of their content on my socials. I've shared it on our email list. But these 2 men both lost their daughters to the conflict. And I'm not talking October 7th and what's happened since October 7th. This, to clarify, it's happened many years before, because this conflict is ongoing. And these 2 men both experienced the loss of their daughters. The Palestinian father, his daughter was shot by an IDF sniper. The Israeli man, his daughter died because of a suicide bomber. And both of them are part of what it's called the Parent Circle. And the Parent Circle is an organization that brings parents, Israeli, Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian parents together, because they've all lost children to the war. And the unifying thing, unfortunately, is not the hope. The unifying thing for them, unfortunately, is not a gathering of human voices to try to solve the conflict. The unifying thing between them is the fact that they understand losing a child to a conflict that should be no more. And so I met these two men. They shared their story. They're literally best friends now. This is an Israeli Jew and a Muslim Palestinian, both fathers, who are now best friends, who speak all over the world. And I had the privilege to literally sit next to them as they share their pain, their story, their loss, their friendship, and their hope. And they both verbalized it. Our hope is for the end of the occupation, for full civil rights for Palestinians in this context. Again, it's impossible for you and I to come up with where the line should be and how it should be framed. I have very strong opinions, as you probably do, as David would have. And yet all the information is not there. But can we both, I'm talking to you and I, can we agree that the hope of these two Palestinian parents is that for nobody else to experience what they experience, and that there is space at the different tables where we all sit and the different power structures that we all participate in to have honest conversations? These men made me cry. They gave me hope. It was probably the holiest moment in my visit to the Holy Land. It wasn't when I was where Jesus was crucified, where he resurrected, all these beautiful spaces. And again, they're meaningful. And I wouldn't doubt that maybe if I visit in the future, I maybe could connect to those spaces in a different way. But my holiest moment in my visit was between these two men who have paid a high price, who have earned the right through pain to be heard by you and I. So hopefully you're able to reach out. It's called the Parent Circle. I highly recommend you listening to their stories. And it's just two of hundreds of parents that gather together to grieve together and to hope together, so that parents like you and I, or other parents that might be listening, wouldn't go through what they're going. I want to finish with this. His name is Reverend Munther Isaac. He's one of the pastors of the Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. And it is so wild, right? Because we have all this language, Bethlehem. We know it from the nativity story from Christmas, right? But here's Bethlehem, which is an actual place in the world right now, which is on the line, on the side of Palestine. And again, I think I mentioned in the last podcast, when you cross the line, you can see the income inequality. Just by crossing the line, you can see that one side gets better trash services than the other, that one side gets better roads than the other, that one side gets better, right? Just injustices at every level. And this gentleman, Reverend Munther Isaac, he's been on, he was recently interviewed by Tucker Carlson for like an hour. He's been on CNN, an amazing voice who's speaking so clearly about the dangers of the Western American theology to prop up the state of Israel. And I did mention this the podcast before. It's almost like what happened to me walking by the wall. I'm looking for my art, for my moment, as opposed to really taking in the story of everything that was there by the artists and poets. I'm thinking about myself, and Western Christianity has done the same. How can the state of Israel help us get Jesus back in the second coming? Whether they go to heaven or not, we just need to, and not just both the anti-Semitism of that, but the illusion of our narrative being the main narrative. And so Reverend Munther Isaac says, if we look for God right now in the world, and I'm going to end where we started. If you're looking for God right now, anywhere in the world, God is under the rubble. If we use the words of Jesus of Matthew 25, when you give water to the thirsty, when you give food to the hungry, that's where you find Jesus. That's where you can engage with the godliness, with the eternal. That's where you can engage with God right now. You always have to, as God himself chose, according, if you're a believer, and you believe what the Apostle Paul wrote about Jesus, that he undressed himself, according to Philippians 2, of what made him God, and he came to be a servant to the point of death, we have to make the choice. of undressing ourselves of our privileges, of our ideas, and our theology, and our old thoughts. And where is the lowest point that we can go? I can scripturally tell you that's where God is. And I appreciate so much what Reverend Munther is doing, all sorts of Christian leaders, Muslim leaders, non-believing leaders, voices that are speaking against the injustice in Gaza right now. God is under the rubble. And may we come to an understanding in all of our different contexts, wherever we are in the world, who are the least privileged, who are the most oppressed, who are the most marginalized. And we can eliminate the conversation of justice and injustice based on whether they're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or not, whether they're white or black or whatever. We can have honest conversation about the different power structures that happen within different races and communities. Yes, we need to have those conversations, but when it comes to just choosing the side of justice or injustice, maybe we always have the awareness that whoever is the least of these, using the language of Jesus, that's where we need to stand and to use our voices to say enough to the violence and the hatred and the pain that we're causing those who have less than us. And so there's so much more that we can say. I'm always so tempted to contextualize what's happening in Gaza and Israel compared to what's happening here in Puerto Rico and the U.S. And we're definitely going to have some time to chat through that in one of these podcasts, because I want you to know, especially for my American audience, I would like you to know, because I'm assuming the American public system or even the private school system has not told you that America owns colonies still around the world, us being what some people call the oldest existent colony in the world, that I can carry an American passport, but in this island, I can't vote for the American president. And whether you think that Puerto Ricans should be independent or should be a state, I have my opinions, and I'm definitely going to talk about those next time. Independently of that, the thing is, we are taxed and not represented. We don't have representation in Congress. Personally, so I lived in Raleigh, North Carolina for 10 years. I'm living now, this is our 7th year coming back to Puerto Rico. I'm spending more on food. I'm spending more on gas. I'm spending more on taxes. I'm spending more on things that should somehow, because I'm paying for them, give me certain privileges. I'm a second-class citizen in an American colony, even though I have an American passport. So that's another conversation, an important conversation. We want to have it because we would like for you to know and understand from us. So, peace in Gaza, freedom for the Palestinian people, liberation even from the hatred within the Jewish communities. I want to celebrate the Jewish voices in the U.S. that are standing against the injustice because so as a Christian, all these concepts of love thy neighbor, we got them from the Jewish religion, from the Old Testament. And so we get to celebrate the basis of what Jesus spoke. It came from the Jewish people. So if we really go back to where we all come from, we get to a place, hopefully, of kindness, of shared tables, of shared humanity, and of daring to believe that it could be different. You guys are wonderful. We'll see you again.